For the Jets, it's all about surviving the first couple weeks on the schedule. We'll discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, September 6th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so that you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you're listening on a podcast source and enjoy the show, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. And let's get started. First question. John, it looks like the early part of the schedule is kind of difficult for the Jets. What are your expectations? Do you think this team will get off to a hot start? It's tough to say. I mean, you could see things clicking. It seems like there's a lot of good feelings around this team right now. And you kind of see it sometimes. And sometimes you see it the other way. Sometimes, and I remember back in 2020, the Jets had a terrible team. The roster was no good. But there were just all these bad feelings around the team at that point because they had just traded Jamal Adams. And that whole situation kind of put a damper over the offseason. You could just kind of feel that a bad season was coming in 2020. And it was really rough from the first minutes of the opener against Buffalo that year. And, right now, and we're still very much in the honeymoon period with Aaron Rodgers, and things could turn around quickly, but the Jets just have a really good feeling around them. And there are certain teams in the NFL, you see that. In fact, I think one of the teams the Jets are playing Monday night, Buffalo, where there are some question marks surrounding that team, what's going on in their locker room. Right now, it feels like the Jets, they're just entering the season on a very good note. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets got off to a good start this season, but I do want to warn everybody, and this is something I've been thinking for the last couple months. I've mentioned it a couple times on the show if you're an everyday, or you may have heard this already. I'm not necessarily expecting the Jets, or I don't necessarily think it's the end of the world if the Jets go off to a bit of a slow start. Now, the Jets can't get off to like an 0-5 start. They can't go 1-5 in the first 6 games. But if you look at the early part of the schedule, and, you never know for sure who the good teams are going to be because sometimes there are surprises, both good and bad in this league. And sometimes there are key injuries. And, the NFL is a league where injuries change the trajectory of seasons. But, you start off with Buffalo, who's expected to be the class of the AFC this year. They're always at the top of the division. A trip to Dallas week 2. Look, early in the season, Dallas is always going to be a tough place to play. They have a lot of talent on that roster. Now, the Cowboys do have some down seasons, so if you catch them the right year in like December, maybe it's not such a tough game. But early in the season when the Cowboys are, competing, that's not an easy trip. You've got New England at home, which of the early season games, that's probably going to be among the easier ones. But you've got a trip to Denver. You've got games against the Chiefs and the Eagles, the two teams that went to the Super Bowl last year. It's tough. And as good as things seem right now, and as much as Aaron Rodgers seems to have clicked with Garrett Wilson, there could be a bit of a learning curve. I mean, there could be a bit of an adjustment period where these two work to get on the same page. It's one thing to have good chemistry in practice. It's one thing to have good chemistry for one preseason pass. Sometimes it takes a little bit for things to really click. And if you look at similar situations, Peyton Manning going to Denver back in 2012, Tom Brady going to Tampa Bay in 2020. Those were situations where those teams, they got off to a little bit of a slow start, and then things started to click with Manning. It was like a month or two. With Brady, it was around November, December where things started to click. But, it took a little while for them to get going in those situations. Now, a little bit of a different spot for Aaron Rodgers because he's in an offense he knows very well, whereas Manning and Brady were kind of adjusting to life with new offensive coaches who were kind of trying to mesh their schemes with what Manning and Brady did well. The Jets have a guy running their offense, Nathaniel Hackett, who already has great chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. They worked very well together in Green Bay. And Rodgers, while he has to develop chemistry with Garrett Wilson, he's got a couple familiar targets, Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb. So you do have some things working for Rodgers, but again, a bit of an adjustment period. If you look at the schedule on paper, and it doesn't always work out this way on paper. Last year there were some surprises on the Jets schedule, and then mainly in the name of backup quarterbacks they faced. I don't think we were expecting to face so many backup quarterbacks, but if you're looking on paper, things really start to open up once we get past the first 6-7 weeks or so. That's when the schedule starts to get a lot easier. So I'd love for the Jets to get off to a great start. I think if the Jets get off to like a 4-2 start, then they may run away with this thing. But if the Jets are like 3-3, I think even if the Jets are like 2-4 after the first 6, I'm not necessarily going to panic. You always do wonder. I'm sure like the New York media is going to be going crazy at that point, but you got a veteran roster. Jets are one of the oldest teams in the NFL, and that has good and bad. But I think one of the good things that will come with it is that you have a lot of veterans on this team. You have guys who aren't necessarily going to be panicked over a bit of a slow start. So I'm not necessarily overly concerned with how the Jets begin this season. I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world if things get off to a little bit of a slow start for this team. I think it's very manageable. Another thing to remember is that the guy who's arguably the best player on the offense, Breece Hall, he may not be at full strength at the start of the season. He'll be in the lineup, he'll be playing, but he's coming off a pretty serious knee injury. And I think the Breece you get in December, the Breece you get in January, that might be a better version of Breece Hall than you get in the early part of the season. So there are lots of things that are potentially lining up for maybe this not to be the start everybody wants. And I just encourage everybody to keep it in stride. Remember, it's not the end of the world if you lose a game, especially in September, October. Plenty of teams have had successful seasons, if they haven't gotten off to the greatest start in the world. I mean, New England, 3 of their 6 Super Bowls, they lost week 1. Last year, the Bengals got off to an 0-2 start before they came to New York and actually defeated the New York Jets. So these are just things to keep in mind. You never want to get too high when the team's winning, and you never want to get too low when the team is losing. And again, I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets got off to a good start. I mean, this is a very talented football team. It's a team that's very good at a lot of the key spots, so I'm not diminishing it. I think this is going to be a good season for the Jets. Will it be a good season from week 1? Perhaps, or it may take a little while to get things going. But you know what I just said about how you got a team with a schedule that maybe looks a little bit easier in the back end. That's not the worst thing in the world. You want to be the team that's playing well down the stretch, because we saw what happened last year. The Jets were kind of the opposite. Jets got off to the hot start last year, and unfortunately, they suffered a lot of injuries, and that led to a really, really rough finish where it's a season that frankly should have ended in the playoff berth did not. So I think things are really lined up though for the, even if they either they get off to a hot start and they keep it going, or maybe they get off to a slow start. I think things are lined up for the Jets to be playing really well down the stretch, at least from where we sit now on September 6th. So we'll see what happens, but I feel good about where this team is heading. And I think that, even if it is not the greatest start in the world, I still really like this team's potential. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue talking about potential. We'll talk about a player who has been one of the pleasant stories of training camp in the preseason, Mekhi Becton. What does the future hold for him? Well, it depends, and we'll discuss continuing this Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Harry's. No matter why you shave, Harry's has you covered for the best shave of your life at a price you'll love. From their legendary high-quality razors to skin products like exfoliating face wash and hydrating lotion, Harry's gives you a premium shave without the premium price tag. Get better quality and a better price than other razors when you get Harry's delivered right to your door. A smooth shave should not be rough on your wallet. The starter set is is a $13 value for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. It includes a 5-blade German-engineered razor, weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and a travel cover. Scheduled delivery for refills as low as $2, half of what you pay for other blades. Harry's makes the skincare products that will give you the best shave ever. Creams, washes, and lotions that will keep your skin healthy and hydrated. Blades made in their own factory in Germany that stay sharp. Guys who've tried it say their 8th shave is as sharp as their first. Sleek, ergonomic, weighted handles that look great in your bathroom and give you precise control with each swipe. There's no reason not to try Harry's. Even if you have a beard like me, you want to keep it trim. You want to keep it looking neat. And Harry's has the highest customer satisfaction in the shaving industry. And they're still offering a no-risk trial. If you don't like your shave, no worries. It's on them. Get your best shave ever with Harry's razors and skincare products. Get a $13 starter set for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. That's harrys.com/NFL for a $3 starter set. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers, folks who tune in Monday through Friday. We have new episodes each day. If you missed our 2-part discussion with Iron Eagle, we posted those 2 episodes earlier in the week, so be sure to check them out. Our next question, hey, John, how do things play out contractually if Becton ends up staying healthy and makes the Pro Bowl this year, or at least has a good season? It seems like it would be a little hard to get overly confident that he'll be healthy going forward, yet I'm sure he'd want to be paid well based on a good year. Was wondering if you could talk how things might play out. Well, it would be complicated, but one thing I will say is that's the best possible scenario for the New York Jets, because you want Mekhi Becton to be a tough decision this offseason. He's missed 2 full seasons, so you can't feel completely confident in giving him a contract, but you want to make this a really tricky decision, because that means Mekhi Becton's had a great season to compare with the 2 seasons he's missed. So we should hope the Jets are lucky enough that the Becton decision's tough to make, because if it's an easy one, that means Becton probably has not had a good year, or he's gotten injured again. And the only way it's going to be an easy decision is if it's an obvious you let him go. It's tough to find offensive linemen in this league. So I think if Becton has a good season, the Jets are kind of have to pay him. I mean, I don't know that they'll have a choice, because you're going to have 2 other offensive linemen hitting free agency. Now, you do have Connor McGovern, and in theory, you have a replacement in-house in Joe Tippmann. So maybe that's a little bit easier, but Dwayne Brown's going to be a free agent after the season, and Dwayne Brown's at the end of his career. I mean, I wasn't convinced the Jets could get one more good season out of Dwayne Brown last year when they signed him. They got one good season out of him. Can they get a second one? I don't think there's a third good season out of Dwayne Brown left. So when you're already losing your other tackle, because I think this is Dwayne Brown's last year with the Jets one way or another. Either he's going to play well or he's not going to play well. I don't see Dwayne Brown being back in 2024. So it's tough enough to replace one tackle. Do you think the Jets are going to be able to replace both tackles? That's a very tall order. So if Becton goes out and plays well, they'll probably have to pay him. And part of the reason they'll probably have to pay him is there just aren't many tackles in the league. So despite the fact it is a risk, there's going to be another team out there that's going to be willing to roll the dice on Becton. So what the Jets may end up doing is they may end up just going with the franchise tag, because that would prevent them from at least needing to make a huge financial commitment before you get the second good season. But I don't think that there's like a bridge contract to be worked out with Becton, because I think there might be a perception that, well, maybe Becton will take less money because he hasn't played as well. He won't need to do that, because there's going to be a team out there that's going to be willing to roll the dice, because everybody needs a tackle. And there are teams out there desperate for a tackle, and there are teams that will see the upside. And frankly, in situations like this, there are coaching staffs and GMs that know that their job's on the line, and they know that, if we don't win this year, we're out of here. So we're just going to roll the dice. And if it doesn't work out, it's somebody else's problem. So I think you could look at it. You could end up seeing a situation with the franchise tag, but one way or another, I think Mekhi Becton will get paid if he has a good season, and the Jets should be so lucky. Our next question, John, how do you see the running back rotation working out in the early part of the season? So this is an interesting question, because as we've mentioned, Breece Hall's coming back from an injury. Now, Robert Saleh said something ridiculous the other day. It was like a vintage Robert Saleh comment where he says one thing and means another, where he said there's not going to be a pitch count, but we're going to be judicious in how we use him. So there's not going to be a pitch count, but there's going to be a pitch count. Thanks, Robert. The Jets will be judicious, I think, in how they use Breece Hall, because he was the biggest part of the offense at the point he went down last year. And it's amazing how little it gets talked about. When we talk about reasons the Jets missed the playoffs last year, the reason things fell apart, you talk about the quarterbacks fairly, because the quarterback play was awful for most of the season. You talk about the injuries to the offensive line. Again, very fair point to make. The Jets were decimated on the offensive line with injuries. I know offensive line's a spot where you deal with a lot of injuries, but not like the Jets had last year. You could talk about some of the coaching blunders. There are lots of things you can point to last year, but it feels like it's very rarely mentioned how big of an impact Breece Hall was having. The Jets were winning games behind the run game last year, and Breece Hall goes down, and they were never the same on offense. And I think, Breece Hall looked like a superstar running back those first 7 weeks, and having him healthy down the stretch this year will make a big difference. You want to preserve him, so I think you want to make sure that he's in good shape. Now, you could argue that that's part of the reason Dalvin Cook is here. and I think it is part of the reason, is that, you eliminate the temptation. But Cook hasn't had a lot of work either. He signed kind of late too. So this first week or two, I'm not sure Cook's going to get a ton of touches. And this could be like Michael Carter's last chance to really make an impact on this team. And look, I think any way you slice it, the fact Dalvin Cook here is a bit of a vote of no confidence in Michael Carter. And I think it's fair because Carter did not do the job last year. And I was a Michael Carter guy heading into last season. I'm really down on him. Not a lot of big playability. Looked very ordinary. And when Brees went down last year, look, I thought it was going to be a rough road ahead for the Jets, but I said, we're downgrading from superstar, but we should at least have quality running back play, and really did not get it. So Carter may get an opportunity. This might be his last chance to really make an impact and show he belongs on this team. I would imagine that he'll actually have a fairly increased workload, at least the first couple weeks of the season. He'll get more carries than you expect. And then eventually, I think Dalvin Cook will get himself into shape, and then a couple weeks in the season, I think Cook will become the lead back. And then Brees, over the course of the first couple weeks of the season, I think by maybe November, Brees takes over as the lead back. So this could be a situation where there are three different lead backs where Michael Carter may try and get you to Dalvin Cook, and then Dalvin Cook will get you to Brees Hall. And then down the stretch, Brees maybe takes over and becomes the guy again. I think that you have multiple layers here. There'll be a kind of a complex backfield. It'll be kind of interesting. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll close out our weekly mailbag. We're going to talk hot seat. We're going to talk linebacker depth. Plenty still to come here on this Wednesday mailbag Locked On Jets episode. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun you'll have. And I'm not just promoting Gametime. I'm a customer. Last week I was going to the U.S. Open, but I waited till the last minute to buy tickets for the event. Great tennis happening in New York. Been watching it the last 2 weeks, really been getting into it. And I used the Gametime app. It was super easy to use. Sometimes these ticket sites, they had needless hurdles to buying tickets. Gametime was super easy. I got the tickets immediately and found a really good deal. You can forget planning months in advance. Gametime has tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. So if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And you can get images of your seat before you buy, so you'll know exactly what to expect before you arrive. You won't have to worry about finding some obstructed seat view. That's a big surprise. You get the images right before you go to check out your game or event. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. We continue with our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, do you think Sherwood will be a liability on the second level? Mosley is mostly solid in his run and pass coverage, but Quincy Williams, while a good athlete, finds himself out of position at times. Quan Alexander was very good last year at cleaning up the runs and proved adept at finding the gap and hitting it. He did not sign for much, so I find it interesting that they felt comfortable with Sherwood taking that role, though I have not seen any of that flash on tape. With the aggressiveness of the defensive line, one area to exploit the D is on draws and traps where the defensive line will flow upfield and the offensive line will get to the second level. Personally, I'm concerned with Sherwood. They are more susceptible now. So the Jets clearly like Sherwood, and I think that the fact they showed so little interest in pursuing Quan Alexander is an indication of that. Sometimes you find out whether a team really likes a player or whether a team really doesn't like a player based on who they pursue and who they don't. I just ended up talking about how, in my view at least, Dalvin Cook being here is an indication the Jets don't love Michael Carter. I think that the Jets letting Quan Alexander go to Pittsburgh is a sign they really like Jamie and Sherwood, because Quan Alexander did not sign for much with Pittsburgh, and the Jets have enough cap space in the moment to bring him in. I mean, Quan Alexander was really a drop in the bucket cap-wise, especially for a guy who you would expect to play about half the snap. So Sherwood's really going to step up this year. And, the Jets have been right about some guys. They've been wrong about some guys. I will say that this coaching staff and front office, they're not 100% with the guys that they're really high on. I mean, a couple of years ago, they were really selling you on the idea LaMarcus Joyner was going to be great at safety, and that did not pan out. But of course, there have been some excellent moves from this team. Obviously, the 2022 draft class, they knew right away that they had a lot of hits. So it's a bit of a mixed bag when we're talking about how the coaching staff and how the front office have performed. I agree with you. I mean, I haven't seen a lot on tape that makes me feel great about Sherwood. That preseason, I did not think he looked all that. He had a big play or two in the opener against Cleveland. The rest of the preseason, I was a little underwhelmed. I was really hoping for a big preseason for Sherwood because then I could say, okay, that's why they did it. I don't want to overstate the significance of the third linebacker. As I said on the show many times, I think people are maybe going a little overboard with what Quan Alexander brought to the table. I thought he had a very solid season last year, but I don't think the third linebacker is necessarily the player who makes or breaks your defense. That said, he is a guy who will play about 50% of the snaps, so it is a role for Sherwood. I think the Jets are hoping more than anything that Sherwood provides them good coverage because, they don't really have a great cover linebacker. I think Mosley can drop to the right spot in the zone coverage. He can make a tackle on a pass completed in front of him. He's not a great cover guy, and Quincy Williams really can't cover much at all. He's a big play guy against the run. He'll shoot the gap and maybe make a big tackle for a loss and deliver a big hit. I think the Jets are looking for that coverage linebacker, and I think that's part of the rationale behind drafting a safety like Sherwood and converting him to linebacker. Your safeties generally are better cover guys than linebackers. So if you take a college safety and move to linebacker, you're hoping to increase the coverage quality. But I think it's an open question right now. I think it's fair to wonder what you're getting from Sherwood. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the thing that destroys the Jets season if they don't get good play from Sherwood. But I do have to say, after watching the preseason, after watching Sherwood, I haven't seen it yet. I don't think it's outrageous to think we might see it. I don't think it's outrageous to think Sherwood could be a good player, but I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen enough that makes me fully confident in Jamie and Sherwood. And our last question, John, are Saleh and Douglas on the hot seat this year? If they have another losing season with Rodgers, how do you justify keeping them given their record? Firing them might annoy Rodgers, but ownership can't allow that to impact the decision. Well, I think if Rodgers put his foot down, they'd probably be safe. But yeah, look, these guys, based on the way last season ended, I think we're probably going to enter the season not necessarily with their jobs. I think there's a difference between saying your seat's red hot and saying that these guys probably can't afford another really bad season. I think that's part of the reason they're both so behind getting Rodgers, because if you're Robert Saleh or if you're Joe Douglas, you need a good season not only saves your job, but a good season probably gets you a contract extension. And what quarterback out there gives you a better chance of having a good season than Aaron Rodgers? Now, that comes with more pressure. If you have a bad season this year, how do you justify it when you've got Aaron Rodgers? It's really tough to have Aaron Rodgers and then say, I don't have the pieces I need to have a good season, especially with the defense you're bringing back. So there are higher expectations, but you also have a real fighting chance. I mean, the last couple of years with the quarterback play the Jets have gotten, it's been really tough to win. So I think Robert Saleh said it the best the first episode of Hard Knocks. The expectations are higher, but that's partially because the Jets have a good team. And yeah, you'd rather have you'd rather have high expectations and a really good roster than low expectations and a really bad roster. Because even with low expectations, if you have a bad roster and you lose, eventually you're going to get fired. You should embrace it. And by all indications, the Jets are embracing kind of being the team that's expected to do things this year. So yeah, I don't think they can afford a bad season, but they've also got the pieces that it shouldn't be a bad season. It should be a really good season. So that's kind of how I view it. Yeah, there are expectations, but there are also the pieces in place that you would expect the Jets to be pretty good this year. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow, our first crossover Thursday of the season with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. Can't wait.